Hello everyone. In this video lecture, we are going to learn the concept of Aucitya in Sanskrit poetics. In this module on the concept of Aucitya, we will be primarily doing two things. First of all, we will see the history of the concept of Aucitya and trace the opinion of various Sanskrit theorists in this respect down the line. Then, we will see the two major ways in which Aucitya functioned in Sanskrit kāvyaśāstra. And finally, we will also explore the impact of Aucitya on kāvya. In early India, the reading of literature was also considered a spiritual activity aiming to liberate readers from their materialistic attachments. Aesthetic emotion or rasa was often considered a secular counterpart of the spiritual bliss. Abhinavagupta, in his commentary on Anandavarthana's Thunyaloka, records Pattanayaka's observations about the unique nature of aesthetic experience. Pattanayaka calls aesthetic experience a special feeling that is similar to the great bliss that one derives by identifying oneself with the highest Brahman. He calls this special feeling Brahma Swada Sahodara. Abhinava also shares the same opinion. According to Abhinava, the relishing of rasa is alaukika or supernormal. For him, the process of aesthetic relish is logottara rupa or something which transcends the experience of the workday world. Does this mean that kāvya was absolutely removed from the constraints of the practical concerns of social life? In reality, kāvya was heavily controlled and tailored by the notions of Aucitya prevalent in the society. The Sanskrit word Aucitya can literally be translated into English as propriety. Aucitya or propriety is the acceptable practice in any field. In the domain of literature, it can mean two things. First, it can mean the use of right word or right aesthetic component that suits the context. It can also mean the standards of behavior that are conventionally considered acceptable in any society. I will explain this with the help of a banal example from real life. Suppose you are writing an email to your professor. How will you address your professor in the email? Or what salutation will you be using? You will write, "Dear Professor so and so." You will not write, "Hey there." Why do you use "Dear Professor" here instead of "Hey there"? The answer is very simple. You know that it is not the right usage according to the cultural conventions of the time. So, there are a whole lot of conventions concerning the right usage or expression in a particular context. The same is the case with the behavior of characters. In a society, there are so many discourses or rules of propriety governing one's behavior. For instance, we have notions of propriety which tell us how we are supposed to behave in a public space, how we are supposed to address our elders, how one is supposed to prepare a research paper. It goes on like that. The concept of Aucitya had always been central to the treatment of literature in Sanskrit kāvyaśāstra. Although it developed as an independent theoretical position or framework in literary science only in the 11th century with Kshemendra's Aucitya Vichara Charcha. Pollock's observation in his book The Language of Gods in the World of Men is particularly noteworthy in this context. Pollock says, propriety came to function as a critical standard in literary judgment at a relatively early date, and by the time of its most complete exposition in the 11th century, it had become an all-embracing category of fitness. Pollock says that the idea of Aucitya was the life force pervading the limbs of a literary text in regulating the use of everything from particular preverbs, particles and individual words to figures of speech, aesthetic mood or rasa, and the argument of the work as a whole. A review of some of the major texts that became landmarks in the intellectual history of Sanskrit kāvyaśāstra will clearly show the importance of Aucitya in Sanskrit poetics. As in the case of many other topics, the idea of Aucitya can be traced back to Bharata's Natyashastra. Bharata opines that, being an imitation of the world, Natya should closely follow the ways and manners accepted in the society. When he says that the characters in drama should wear costumes according to their age, should walk according to their costume, and should speak according to their gait, he is implicitly stating that one should be attentive to the idea of Aucitya. Bhamaha, Dandin, Vamana, Vishwanatha, Mahimabhatta, Hemachandra et al. Are equally concerned with the concept of Aucitya through their discussions of kāvya doshas, or the improper elements in literature that can ruin the beauty of kāvya. The first one to mention the concept of Aucitya in poetics was Rudrada in the 9th century. Up to Rudrada, the idea of Aucitya was being discussed in literary criticism without using the term Aucitya. Rudrada's kāvyaśāstra is the first text to use the term Aucitya in literary theory. Rudrada uses the term Aucitya first in the 2nd chapter of kāvyaśāstra during his discussion of Shabda Alankaras. Rudrada observes that these Shabda Alankaras are to be used only after due thoughts on Aucitya. The word Aucitya again occurs in the 3rd chapter when he warns the poets against the dangers of using yamaka in poems. He opines that the poets should be very careful in the use of yamakas, as it involves a lot of complications. Probably the first author to reflect systematically upon the concept of Aucitya is Anandavarthana. In Dhvanyaloka, Anandavarthana clearly speaks about the importance of Aucitya in literature. According to Ananda, a poet who follows the system of Bharata and others, who studies the work of great poets of the past, and who gives rein to his own genius, must be attentive and exert the greatest care not to relax or depart from the proprieties of the vibhavas and other factors of rasa. Mahimabhatta, in his seminal work Vyakti Viveka, sees impropriety as the only cause for the spoiling of aesthetic emotion. For him, composing a work in conformity with propriety is the very Upanishad of rasa. In Vakrokti Jivita, Kundaka sees Aucitya as a poetic merit and insists that a poet should pay due attention to it during the course of writing. Kundaka's discussion of the idea of Aucitya is primarily in connection with his criticism of Utpada's argument that Urjaswin is a figure of speech. Urjaswin is the indecorous representation of rasas and bhavas in a work of art or work of literature. According to Utpada, Urjaswin is the composition of sentiments, rasas, and feelings or bhavas, wherein an action transgresses propriety because of anger, desire, and so on. The example given by Utpada for Urjaswin is Shiva's indecorous advance towards Parvati before their marriage. Kundaka does not subscribe to Utpada's view that Urjaswin is an alankara, since it tampers with the very idea of propriety of the period. Kundaka observes that rasas, bhavas, etc. that are bound together in an improper or anauchitya fashion not only impede the improvement of rasa but also spoil it altogether. He asks how a rasa marred by impropriety can shine forth as an ornament. In the 3rd chapter of Vakrokti Jivita, Kundaka repeats Anandavarthana and Mahimabhatta's stance that the spoiling of rasa is caused solely by the breach of propriety. In Kavya Prakasha, Mammada also warns the poets against impropriety by saying that impropriety or anauchitya results in the aberration of emotions. If these critics were concerned with the observation of the concept of Aucitya in literary works, the 10th century literary critic Bhoja went a step further by stating that he was concerned with the moral ethos of his time even in the composition of his own voluminous treatise on poetics or literary science, Sringara Prakasha. In the 7th chapter of Sringara Prakasha, Bhoja declares, I hereby pray to the omnipotent God to ensure that while I am composing this book, there would be no transgression of the established order, practice of the social orders, and the 4 life stages. In his Saraswati Kanthaparana, Bhoja actually talks about 6 kinds of aucityas, such as Vishaya Aucitya or the propriety of subject, Vachya Aucitya or the propriety of speech, Desha Aucitya or the propriety of place, Samaya Aucitya or the propriety of time, Vartru Vishaya Aucitya or the propriety of using language according to the status of the speaker, and Artha Aucitya or propriety in the use of language according to the subject matter. Here we need to particularly keep in our mind that the first one to use the concept of Aucitya in poetry was Yashovarman of Kannauj in his drama Ramapyudaya in the 8th century. In the prologue to the drama, Yashovarman points out the importance of Aucitya in literature. Words suitable to each character, characters befitting the whole story, the culmination of rasa at the right time, and no deviation from the storyline, a neat organization of component parts, and the incorporation of suitable words. These are the virtues which will win the attention of the erudite audience, Yashovarman says. Yashovarman here refers to the essential qualities which make a good drama. The first among them is the composition of appropriate speech which suits the nature and rank of the characters. The second one is actually the use of appropriate characters, and the third one is the delineation of characters in their proper moods in order to develop rasa in the proper place. Bhoja later on incorporates this idea in his Sringara Prakasha. It's very much possible to draw a parallel between the Indian concept of Aucitya and the Greek and Roman classical notion of decorum. Aristotle in his Poetics emphasizes the need for the poet to aim for the necessary or the probable in characterization and diction. For example, Aristotle opined that it would be improper on the part of a dramatist to show death on the stage, as it causes uneasiness in the minds of the spectators. We can see the same concept of decorum or propriety or aucitya occupying a predominant position in the works of Cicero's De Orator and Horace's Ars Poetica. This means that classical literature in general seems to be under the sway of this insistence on the right things to do. It is possible to argue that decorum or aucitya operated in 2 ways in classical theories of literary production. First of all, it functioned as a guiding principle for the inclusions and exclusions of elements. Second, it functioned as a set of unwritten rules that outline the limits of the representable in literature.